Hi students, today we are going to discuss about sexual reproduction. When reproduction takes place as a result of the fusion of male and female gamete, then it is called sexual reproduction. Fusion of gametes is called fertilization, which results in variation. Sexual reproduction in plants. Flowers are the reproductive organs of plants. A typical flower consists of four main parts, namely sepals, petals, stamen and pistil. Types of flowers. Two types of flowers are there, mainly bisexual flower and unisexual flower. Bisexual flower. If both male and female reproductive parts are present in a flower, then we can call it as a bisexual flower. For example, hibiscus and mustard. In both these plants, we can see both stamen and pistil. That's why they are bisexual flowers. Unisexual flower. Either male or female reproductive part is present in such flowers. For example, papaya and watermelon. Structure of flower. Here, as we discussed, mainly four parts are there in a flower, that is sepal, petal, stamen and pistil. Petal, sepal, petal, stamen and pistil. Here you can see that stamen is having two parts, that is anther and filament. And pistil consists of three parts. The topmost part, that we can call it as stigma, then style and ovary. Stigma, style and ovary. Inside the ovary we can see ovules. Inside the ovary we can see ovules. The colored or most attractive part of a flower is the petal and sepals. Sepals join together to form the calyx, and that protects the flower in its bud stage. Bud stage. Flower bud stage. Pollination. As you have learned it in 7th standard, pollination means transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Pollination is of mainly two types, self-pollination and cross-pollination. When pollen grains produced in the anther are transferred to the stigma of same flower, then it is called self-pollination. When pollen grains produced in the anther are transferred to the stigma of another flower, then it is called cross-pollination. Some agents are there or some mediums are there that are required for cross-pollination to happen. For example, air. Cross-pollination will happen with the help of air or wind or water, or some animals also help in pollination. For example, honeybee and some other insects such and butterfly also, it helps in pollination. Honeybee, butterfly and many animals, and some animals also helps in cross pollination. Pollen germination. Now we learned about pollination, that is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. After reaching the stigma, the pollen grains will absorb some of the nutrient materials. There is some the stigmatic exudate is having some protein and some other nutritious materials are there. Okay, the pollen grain will absorb these materials and it first enlarges. And later it produces one tube-like structure from it that we can call it as pollen tube. That pollen tube pass through the style, that is stigma, then style, that is second part of the pistil. Through the style, then it reaches the ovule, or it reach up to the ovule. It reach the ovule present inside the ovary. Here, the fusion of male gamete is present inside the pollen tube. It is present in the pollen tube, and female gamete or egg is present inside the ovule. Now, inside the ovary, the male gamete from the pollen tube and female gamete present inside the ovule, that is egg. This male and female gamete fuse to form the zygote. The process of fusion of male and female gamete is called fertilization. After fertilization, the product formed, we can call it as zygote. The zygote is produced within the ovary, that is mainly inside the ovule. Development of zygote. Zygote divides to form embryo, that is cell division will happen to the zygote. One cell, zygote is one single cell, it will divide into 2, then to 4, then to 8 and 16, like that it will divide, and we can call that structure formed, multicellular structure formed from zygote as embryo. Zygote divides to form embryo. Now the ovule. Inside the ovule, now embryo is formed. Now the ovule develops thick coat and changes into seed. That is, the ovule changes after fertilization. After fertilization, zygote is formed. The zygote will develop into embryo and the ovule will develop into seed. And the ovary itself changes into a fruit. Other parts of flower fall off. The seed germinates to form a plant under suitable conditions such as air and moisture. That is, after fertilization, inside the ovule, zygote is formed. Zygote will develop into embryo and the ovule will develop into seed and the ovary will develop into the fruit. Germination of pollen on stigma. Here you can see that 2 pollen grains are there on the stigma, and in that one germinated, two pollen grains are showing. Both the 2 pollen grains are showing pollen tubes, but one of them produced that there its pollen tube is very long, and now it already reached the ovule. Okay, there the male gamete from the pollen tube will fuse with the female gamete inside the ovule and the zygote is formed there.